Welcome to the latest episode of Lean In Leander. Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast. Wanted to take a couple of minutes here to thank you all for your support here at Lean In Leander. I've seen quite a number of you around the city, and you're always very nice to give me a quick little shout, and I appreciate that very, very much. Hopefully the content that we're producing here on the podcast is something that you find interesting. I know that the politicos usually like the interview process on Vote in Leander, and I'm definitely looking to kind of expand on some of the things that we talk about here in the city, as well as continue to highlight small businesses in the area. And with that in mind, I actually reached out to a local couples therapist. Her name is Ellisa Mimlitsch, and Ellisa has her practice here in the Leander area. Our conversation, which you'll find in a couple of minutes, we'll go through the podcast together, but our conversation circled around the ideas of couples therapy and some of the things that prevent people from asking for the kind of help that they can use when it comes to some of that subject matter, specifically mental health, and again, just couples struggling to connect or reconnect after, some relationship time. It wears on all of us, and it's always a little bit of a challenge, but one of the things that I've come to embrace is asking for help when help is necessary. And so I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit, maybe knock down a couple of people's reticence to maybe reach out if you have a need for that type of assistance. So Ellisa was very, very kind in her time, and I definitely encourage you, if you are someone who is looking at therapy or couples therapy, to definitely reach out to her here in the Leander area. It's nice to have mental health expertise locally within our community. So she's a small business here in Leander. It's called Therapy by Ellisa, and you'll see scrolling down here a couple of websites and other social media channels that you can kind of look up before we get started here in the podcast. So I definitely enjoyed our conversation. It was a very enlightening conversation for me. And I'm approaching this kind of, the caveman approach, if you will, just a simple layman trying to figure out a few things. And hopefully the questions I ask will help you as well. If you're interested, I am considering maybe doing a series on mental health, and we can kind of together explore some of the subject matter that is involved in that arena, as well as find local experts to help us with some of those questions. So let me know in the comments, let me know in the suggestions if that's something that you think would be valuable to the community, and I'm happy to explore that further. So without any further delay, here's my conversation with Ellisa Mimlitsch. So I am at the very comforting and very wonderful space here that Therapy by Ellisa has established here in our fair city of Leander, Texas. And I'm here with Ellisa Mimlitsch, right? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay, good, awesome. So Ellisa was someone who had reached out to me a couple of months ago and was just interested in highlighting her business. And as part of my efforts to kind of give people an idea of what's available in Leander, she fit the bill for what we do here at Lean In Leander. So her space is very particular from that perspective, and it's a little bit more into the therapy and mental health, and in your case, couples therapy, right?
Absolutely.
So I thought this would be an interesting topic for us to explore together on the podcast, and I appreciate Ellisa giving us some time here today. So we have a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be talking about, but we're going to kind of see where the conversation takes us. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of your professional history, how you came into this particular space, and what made you choose Leander.
Sure. So I've always wanted to work in the helping field. My parents were very active in their community out of New Jersey. So growing up, my parents would always bring in children who came from poor communities or broken homes and would take them in as their own. So I got used to being around children and different people from different communities where they were helped in areas that their own families couldn't really provide. So I knew at a young age that I wanted to help people. My grandmother is a nurse, or was a nurse, And my mother was an EMT. So again, kind of coming from that helping background.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, when I was in my undergrad, I wanted to be working in mental health. So I got my bachelor's degree, and then I got my master's degree at New York University in social work, and I started to work in chemical dependency.
Oh, okay.
So the majority of my career has been working in what's called persistent mentally ill populations. So people who have bipolar, schizophrenia, persistent mentally ill diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
Along with chemical dependency as well. So the majority of my career had been working in community mental health. And then I slowly started to transition into working with families and working with couples. And that's really where I found my passion, and I realized that that is something I really need to focus in on, is couples and families.
And that's been in the last 3-5 years, or what's the timeline on that?
I would say since 2014, I started to work with families and couples.
Okay.
And then when my husband and we relocated to Texas, I wanted to continue to work with families and couples, and I was working with a practitioner out of Georgetown, and that was a group practice, and I continued to work with families and couples. And I wanted to start out on my own around the time that COVID happened. Mm-hmm. And I realized that there was such a need in Liberty Hill and also Leander, because Georgetown really was saturated mm-hmm. with a lot of therapists, mm-hmm. where Leander was very much limited. And I wanted to be in a community where I would make an impact mm-hmm. on those families and those couples. And I'm still pretty much the only therapist really here in Leander.
Okay.
So,
yeah. So when you moved to Texas, were you in the Leander area already, or it sounds like maybe you were living in Georgetown at the time?
Yeah. So my husband and we do live in Georgetown.
Okay.
And kind of being in the mental health profession, it's always best practices if you don't live and work in the same community, because you tend to run into a lot of your clients in the grocery stores or Walmart, and they want to start having conversations, and I'm like, whoa, we gotta stop, because I can't protect your confidentiality in the middle of HEB.
Right.
So because there were
people
so
in Texas are chatty too, so I mean that would happen, right?
Yes. In the middle of the line, I will have a client start chatting with me, and I'm like, okay, hang on, we can talk about oranges and bananas, but not your therapy.
That's funny. So that is one of the things I wanted to highlight in having the conversation with you, was that there is a limited amount of professional assistance in the greater Leander area, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really that was striking when I was doing a little bit of research, in that you appear to be, at least to me, and I didn't dig into it necessarily, but I was like, there's really not a whole lot of couples counseling really out, even further out, right? I mean, it exists. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I was like, you're kind of like in your own little oasis, if you will, of therapeutic help, right? I mean, there's just not a lot around here, which is again one of the reasons I wanted to bring the topic up, right? Because mental health is something that is obviously, I don't want to say it's the subject du jour, but there's a lot of conversation around mental health now, and it's good. It's a good thing. I think that a lot of people have hesitated to have conversations in and around mental health, and it's a spectrum. There's a lot of different things. You've touched on a number of them already, the dependencies and just kind of the psychological challenges that certain people have with their mental health, anxiety, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But then it comes to couples therapy, and then you're like, okay, then it's two people with, some sort of ailment, for lack of better terms, right, that they need to try to work through, right? And I thought that would be a really interesting topic, I think, for my listeners and the people who subscribe to this podcast, to hear that type of service is available, and to learn a little bit more about it, right? So that's what we're going to try to do here for our folks. So we've talked a little bit about your history and then what led to you specializing in couples therapy. Mm-hmm. What are some of the most rewarding aspects of working with couples? couples? Like, what draws you to that?
Well, great question. I think what really draws me to working with couples is that it's not just one perspective. So when you work with an individual, I only have one perspective sitting in front of me. So being able to have two people who can share the same, situation, but with two very different perspectives. And then my job is to help kind of explore where we went a little screwy in terms of some of their conflicts that they may experience. And also where is the truth or where is the meat and potatoes. And that's kind of where I dive in. And I get to provide my perspective and really see how my couples will evolve over time. And that's what I say is my gift, is that I get to watch my couples evolve and use the skills that they are given and taught. And it's just a magical experience.
Is there sometimes maybe just a general, I can see where they would be, if it's a, let's say it's a mixed cultural couple, right? Someone from, I don't know, India and someone from America or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. They wouldn't necessarily have the same growing up experience. They won't grow up necessarily the same. Now they've met and they had those shared experiences, but once you get into marriage or a long-term relationship, some of that other stuff starts to like creep in, right? I was going to say seep, but you said creep, so okay. But yeah, so do you find that oftentimes it's just the communication that starts to falter within the relationship, or is there maybe something a little bit more, it's more than that, right? Maybe it just starts with that. I'm curious more than anything else.
Well, usually communication challenges start pretty quick within relationships, especially if people come from very different cultural and upbringings as well. So most of the time, couples will immediately experience challenges right away within the relationship. But in the beginning of a relationship, you always have the honeymoon phase where everyone is super excited. So no one really pays close attention to some of the conflicts, and they will rationalize or justify, someone's behavior. So it kind of gets swept under the rug, so to speak. And then something happens where you can't ignore it any longer. And that's when people usually say, we have to do something to repair this because we can't maintain this any longer. They're usually arguing, or the opposite of the arguing, where they don't talk to each other, and that's emotional neglect. So
is either one of those, maybe again from a psychological perspective or therapeutic perspective, more damaging? Is it more damaging to just shut off and not talk, or is it more damaging to just argue all the time?
It depends. Yeah, it kind of depends on the level of arguing and what's being said, and if we're becoming physical. Yeah. Whereas if what's called stonewalling, where we shut down and stop talking, and you don't talk at all, then that means that there's no dialogue, no communication, and that creates isolation in couples. Mm-hmm. So it really kind of depends on how far we take each pendulum and how far they swing.
So I'm kind of trying to lead to the question of misconceptions to couples therapy, right? Are there misconceptions? I mean, I know people are reticent to get therapy. People are reticent to get help, period, right? And
I don't think. Maybe I am. I don't know if that's an American ethos or not, but it's pretty common, right?
Absolutely.
But are there misconceptions that, someone in my viewing audience or my listening audience would say, you know what, I never thought about it that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, one that really comes to mind is, I hear this quite often is, therapy doesn't work for us, or therapy won't work for us. I'm too broken, or we are too broken. And they don't take that opportunity to try something different. And so they already have that, predisposed thought that therapy is not going to work. Or if they have been in a previous relationship where there has been a divorce and they tried couples before and it didn't work, then they don't try again because they feel like it's going to end in a divorce. Mm-hmm. So therapy is almost like plagued to them, and they tend to stay away. The other misconception that keeps a lot of people out of couples therapy is the fear that the therapist is going to take sides. And this is something I hear quite often, and it's very damaging to couples or people who are interested in going into counseling, because of that fear stops them that the therapist is going to side with one or the other and or judge. And it's so disheartening. And that's one thing about me that I say to my clients, I do not take sides. I treat the couple, meaning the marriage, the relationship. I don't pick between husband or wife or husband or husband. I treat the couple.
So there was something that I picked up on a number of years ago now. It was actually part of a marriage vow. It was a pastor, if I remember correctly, said this. He would say, when you are having the opportunity to interact with either one of the couple, right? He would say, make sure that you validate their thinking, validate what it is that they're saying, right? But advocate for the marriage. Would you say that kind of fits? It kind of sounds like that's what you just said, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, validating is absolutely a crucial point in communication. But it's really important that we put our relationship as primary.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is a mutually beneficial process, right? I mean, we're both looking to repair something, right? In those instances, right?
Hopefully.
Do you find that there's I would imagine there's a little bit of tug and pull back and forth with the couple. Is that you mentioned the joy and seeing them kind of come to that point? Is how does that? You say you don't take sides, but you're bound to see that, right? You're bound to see that someone's being a little bit more reticent or maybe not sharing enough or whatever. How do you work through those types of things as a therapist?
Yeah, sure. So that's kind of what makes me a little bit unique as to why I work with couples, is because not just professionally, but also personally, I have a very direct style. And that's kind of what I'm known from the professional, not world, but, the community, but also friends as well, is that I am more direct. So if I see something, I say something to my couples. So when I'm in a session, I see somebody kind of either becoming passive or saying something that is not either appropriate or not fitting to the relationship. That's kind of when I jump in and I really challenge my clients, and I'll say something to the way of, is that really truthful, or is there another way that we can say that? Because I really want my couples and my clients to both feel heard and to make sure that we are really addressing kind of what's underneath. So I don't take sides, but if I hear that something is amiss in their dialogue, I'm going to point it out for their observation. For sure.
And is that in general a therapeutical approach, or is that something that's very specific to you? I'm kind of trying to, like, what differentiates you in your approach to couples therapy than maybe someone in Georgetown or in North Austin?
Yeah, I would say that that is something that is particular to me. There are other therapists that also take a more direct approach, but it's not common for therapists to feel comfortable with being direct with their clients. It's been my experience working in the field of mental health for about 15 years now that a lot of therapists are more passive and they kind of take a backseat and they really want to listen and help the client kind of process on their own. Where for me, and I'll probably help to answer some questions later about, I'm a skill-based therapist. So that's kind of where I really jump in and help my clients with those skills. So that helps with my direct style.
So when you say skills-based therapy, you're talking about the individual skills as opposed to your skills, right? Like helping them determine what helps them communicate more effectively. Would that be correct? Or
no? So a skill-based therapist is a particular approach for mental health. So it is a style that a therapist will kind of assume within their role as a therapist. So there's something called traditional talk therapy, which is what most people are used to in Americanized mental health, is where a client will sit on the couch, like I am, and predominantly speak for the entirety of the session, and a therapist will sit across from them and nod and listen and possibly mirror what's being said and really validate your feelings. And it's more of a slow process where the client will explore and come up with their own solutions and their own answers, but there's not a lot of feedback. So me being a skill-based therapist, I'm the opposite of that, where having a session with me is much more of a dialogue. It's much more of a conversation, and I give my clients skills right away in the session, where I will jump in and say, okay, so we are going to mirror, we're going to use reflective listening skills, we're going to validate, we're going to bring in empathy. I need you to reframe this statement to your partner. A lot of times I will, bring out a lot of props, and I do a lot of role plays in my session. I do a lot of activities. So that's what makes a skill-based therapist versus a talk therapist.
Gotcha. And that kind of falls into the modalities, right? Of the type of therapy that you're providing, right? Am I correct on that, or?
It could be. I mean, the types of modalities are more like cognitive behavioral therapy, or Gottman method, or Imago. So those are basically what kind of treatment modalities a therapist may use. But when I talk about skills, it's just the kind of language that I'm going to be using in a session, and or what kind of activities that you would expect, and the interaction. So like a traditional talk therapist is not usually going to give skills, where a skill-based therapist will.
Okay. And I appreciate you sharing that, because part of what I want to try to do is help people understand your approach, right? So if there is anyone in the audience who would be contemplating, going down the path of therapy, that it helps them understand how you work, right? Since you are a small business here in Leander, and that's part of the focus as well, as on some of the smaller businesses here in Leander. So your space here, how long have you been at this space? Because it's right past the Lakewood Park, and I forget the name of the facility, the space here. It's the
Highland Drive.
Yeah, there you go. It's the Highland Business Park, right? So how long have you been in this particular location?
So I think I have been here since 2022. But I did get the office in 2021. It was actually in, I think, December. So then in January, the new year started. But this office building was built during when COVID was happening. So this complex kind of sat for about a year and a half. And when I was actively looking for office condominiums, it was quite challenging to find. And I found this location on Craigslist. It still exists, yes. And yeah, so I secured the office, and I'm not good with dates or years, so I think 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years, going on 3 years. Yeah, it'll be 25 before we know it, right?
Yes,
exactly. So when you're doing your therapy and you're talking to couples, one of the things that I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, and believe is probably the wrong word, but one of the things I think about therapy is that there is a benefit to breaking down some of the barriers to any kind of communication where the troubles may be, right? It's just, I would think that a lot of it is just communicating, like you just, again, stop talking to each other, or you're talking over each other, you're not paying attention anymore. What type of communications would you say are beneficial to keeping a healthy relationship? Like what are some of the secrets, if you will?
Sure. So, right off the bat, there's something called reflective listening skills. And really what that is the ability to effectively mirror what is being said to you. So if your partner is speaking to you, it is your responsibility to do the best that you can to really remember what your partner said and repeat it back at them using their words. And this is one of the biggest skills that I teach my clients right away when they first come into therapy, is the use of reflective listening. Because I say if we can't effectively communicate in the beginning of our therapy approach, it's going to be very difficult for us to talk about any other topics that are heavier and more challenging without the use of reflective listening. So reflective listening is that where we are going to use the words and repeat the words that were spoken to us. But we're also going to loop in a little bit of curiosity in there because I want to make sure that I heard my partner correctly before I have my own kind of reaction or my own response.
Mm-hmm.
And once my partner kind of confirms whether I mirrored their statement correctly, then I'm going to bring in the validation, which sounds something to the effect of, so I think you are saying this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, or it sounds like you're saying this to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then we want to bring in that empathy of, I really feel, or I'm going to try to feel what you're saying to me. Like, I would assume that you would feel this. And that gives each client in the couple the opportunity to really step into the shoe, so to speak, of that partner. So whatever their initial reaction may have been, it might now be influenced to be something completely different. Because now I've mirrored it, I have reflected it, I have validated it, and now I also bring in the empathy.
So that would again lead to maybe helping with the understanding and support of each other from that perspective. Because I know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm guilty of it. I know that I do this, right? I'll oftentimes in a conversation, whether it would be a serious conversation or just something that, it's just whatever, we're talking about work, whatever it happens to be the day, I will actively make an assumption of what the point is, right? Like I'm already assuming what it is that you're going to tell me, and I already know what it is. So I'm already kind of working on an answer. It's not great, right? It's not the greatest way to do things, because then you're not actively listening to your partner. You're not actually understanding what it is that they say. And I catch myself doing that all the time, right? And whether it's not dismissive. I'm never dismissive in that, I don't think. Maybe I am. I don't know. From that perspective, it's just stopping, it's pausing to say, okay, I want to make sure I hear what it is that you're saying, right? Is it, I hear you saying this kind of approach?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or let me see if I understand you correctly.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna repeat what you said, verbatim. I'm gonna use your words, and then I'm gonna put a little like question mark, like, did I get that right? Am I on track? Is that accurate? Right? So I'm a little curious because I want to leave it open for you to tell me whether I'm on track or did I miss that entirely. But you're right. A lot of couples and or people in general make assumptions. And that is one thing I advocate strongly on in general, is to not assume. Because once you make an assumption, then what happens is then you become influenced based off of your assumption, and then you start to behave off of that assumption. And if you haven't communicated that to your partner at all, they're not able to read your mind, but they're able to see your behaviors. And if they don't understand because you didn't communicate that to them and now you're behaving a certain way, that is what's affecting them, is your behavior. But they don't have the understanding because it wasn't verbalized what you just assumed.
So that actually kind of brings us to one of the areas that I wanted to explore a little bit with you, in that a lot of what you see, right, and maybe even what you read, when you start to look at the conversations that are socially exposed for couples, there's always a thought of, or a experience of, where infidelity kind of starts to creep into the conversation, and I want to kind of start there because you started with an assumption, right? And I'm wondering, is it sometimes a presumption of lack of trust, or a presumption of a break of trust, that leads to some of those thoughts of infidelity, or thoughts of, I can't trust this person type of thing, right? When it actually hasn't even occurred. And does that sometimes lead to it actually being acted on? That's kind of a deep question, but...
I mean, it can, but if couples aren't communicating well, and they aren't in therapy, or they're not working on themselves, the miscommunications is naturally going to erode a relationship in many facets. And it may or may not be about a betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
It could be all kinds of things. But if someone is making an assumption and then jumps to a conclusion based off of their partner's behaviors, that again, will cause massive destruction in a relationship, because they're not communicating their fears or their worries or their anxieties.
Has social media amplified that? I mean, you've been a therapist for, almost 2 decades. It sounds like about 15 years, more or less.
Yep.
And that's enough time, I think, to kind of seen you had some exposure to it pre-internet, pre-social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does it exasperate those types of triggers?
So I'm gonna need you to be a little bit more specific as to when you say social media, and I'm curious as to you being more specific on social media and the triggers.
So again, if there's an assumption, right, and there's already been a slight, let's just say a slight change in behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
An example would be perhaps, we used to, theoretical, couple, we used to sit around and, have conversations while we would watch the news, right? And now we're on our phones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of it, right? Like I'm disengaging from you. You no longer have my full attention, right? And unfortunately, for the way that they've been, manipulated, it's an unfortunate thing, because I think the technology, coming from an IT background, the technology is great, right? It's a fantastic technology, but it's the methodology by which it's been manipulated that is the problem, right? It is the algorithms at the end of the day. But that could, I would imagine that would exasperate anything that, if there was already an idea of like, I'm not sure what you're doing on your phone, right?
Yeah, so I would say with the behavior at which it's being handled. So if someone is on their phone and their partner would like to know what they're looking at, and their partner moves the cell phone away, or is less inclined to share their passcode, or is less inclined to show their partner their phone, absolutely is that going to cause a lot of suspicions, and or possibly concluding to that partner already thinking that something may be going on. But a lot of times what happens is that when people are behaving a certain way, that causes insecurity, inferiority within the relationship, and also fear. The partner who's on the other side that's questioning their partner may or may not truthfully want to know the answer, which then keeps them from being direct with their partner and asking, are you having an affair?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something going on? It's really personalized, but it's been my experience where people are less inclined to ask that question direct because they don't want the answer, because then that means that they have to do something about it, and then it changes the dichotomy of the relationship entirely.
And the affair doesn't necessarily have to be a physical affair. It can be a mental affair. It can just be, spending more time with someone who's paying attention to you, kind of thing, right? It could be a friend at work or whatever it would be. It's not necessarily, the physical infidelity, the breaking of any kind of marital bond or anything like that, to quantify that. But you can have an emotional affair, right? I mean,
Yep, you can have an emotional affair, and a lot of times what I call it is more of a betrayal. So there's that line of betrayal and or just lying by omission, so to speak. So how I quantify it with my clients is the level of intention behind the behavior. So if you are engaging in a behavior and you intentionally know what you're doing and you're doing it to evade your partner, that's the problem. That's the problem.
Interesting.
So if you're withholding information and or evading your partner, not sharing, and there's some form of malice intent involved, then it's going to be about a betrayal. And a betrayal is an affair. You can have an emotional affair, you can have a betrayal, and a betrayal is deceit, lies, really. So it all falls under that level of mistrust. So yeah, hopefully that helped answer.
No, it did. And again, I'm trying to kind of explore a couple of things just so that I don't know. I read and I do a little research and I kind of try to prep myself with some things that I see in media, and in research that are topics that people are discussing, right? Whether it be on chat rooms or whatever the case might be. So I've tried to include some of that here. I'm not talking about anybody in particular. These are all fictional, scenarios. But with that said, I'm curious from your perspective as a therapist, and I'm sure it's probably something that you would maybe want to help people understand is there shouldn't be any kind of reticence. Well, that's not the right way to say it. You want people to feel comfortable understanding that therapy is of assistance, whether it's the male in the relationship or the female relationship, if they happen to be, a male-female relationship, right? Anyone in the relationship can prompt the therapeutical path, right? And you want people to feel comfortable with that, right? I mean, it's hard enough to make the decision to get help, but it doesn't matter who asks for the help, as long as you ask for the help, and in your case, together, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why we want to be able to create that safe place. So earlier when I spoke of, people telling me that they felt unsafe in a therapeutic environment because they felt as though the therapist took sides, that really will erode, their interest in returning to therapy and or hearing stories from other people saying that to them, and fearing that if they get into therapy, that you're going to take sides. And then it's no longer a safe place for them.
And is it better, in your opinion, to say, I'm not taking sides as a therapist? Or have you found situations where maybe you felt, or maybe it was said by a couple, that you're taking sides? How do you combat that? How do you blunt that criticism, if you will?
Sure. So right away, when I work with a new couple, part of their paperwork process is they have to sign an agreement that's called a no secrets policy. And any therapist that provides couples counseling, depending on their approach, they may or may not use this document. I use it. And really it is a document that the couple will sign, acknowledging that we are not going to withhold secrets and or use the therapist as a vault of secrets, basically. And so I have my clients sign this document, and then I review it when they're sitting in front of me as a new couple, and I review that document as saying that if you're going to withhold any secrets and you are to tell me, I am going to bring this up in your session, or I give my client the opportunity for the client to tell their partner about whatever that secret is, because I'm not going to hold on to your secrets. Now, the caveat to that is that if the client discloses something to me that is of a trauma history or something that is traumatic in nature, that is information that I will use at my professional discretion, whether or not I will encourage that the client bring it up in the therapy session, or I will encourage that they bring that up to their own individual therapist, or encourage that they find individual therapy for themselves. But that is part of that intake process when I work with clients is that I review that document, but I also review the importance that I'm not here to take sides. I'm here to treat the couple, and you are my couple. So it creates that accountability as well.
Right. Within the therapeutic process, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it is a couples therapy, so if there were an inclination, or I'm sure you probably get, would you be my therapist? You basically are referring to someone else outside of your practice.
It depends. So this is something that is a little bit under review for some therapists who provide couples counseling or do individual. So in the world of therapy, some people could say that it's a conflict of interest. However, if I'm working with a couple and one of the individuals or both of the individuals are experiencing a challenge that is directly correlated to their relationship, I will offer to work with them individually outside of their couples, but it's more of a collaborative approach. So I'm providing their couples counseling, and I'm also doing some individual work on top, because what happens is that when people see outside providers, if they don't sign a release of information and I'm not speaking to their individual therapist, I have no idea what's being said.
Yep.
And it's really hard for me to effectively treat a couple if I'm not involved in their treatment approach. So again, if the individual issue is directly correlated or has an impact on the marriage, that I know from a professional capacity that I have the skill to help them, I will take them on. But again, I also ask the couple for permission before I move forward. So I say that to the couple that's in front of me. I want to make sure that both of them are comfortable with me seeing one or both of them on top of doing the couple's work.
Nice. So I think we've kind of covered the importance of therapy and seeking help. I hope. I've tried to kind of prompt some questions that would kind of answer that overriding question. But for anyone who would have an interest, either as a result of this conversation or just because they have an interest, how do they get in touch with you? How would they reach out to you to start some work?
Sure. You can go on my website, Therapy by Ellisa. The best way to reach me is honestly texting me. I get a ton of spam calls, so I don't usually answer my business line. So texting me is honestly the easiest way. And that's kind of what I'm known for, is getting back to my clients or potential clients rather quickly.
Well, everybody's on their phone already anyway, so it's probably the best way to communicate with folks.
But I've heard from so many people, though, unfortunately, again, is that there are so many people, and I'm grateful for this, is that a lot of people are looking for help now, and there isn't enough of us mental health professionals, in this Austin area. So what's happening is people are looking for help and they're reaching out, but they're not getting anybody on the phone. Gotcha. They're not getting calls back.
Right.
And my heart breaks when people tell me that, because if I were in their shoe, I'd want someone to at least respond. Yep. At least call me back, or at least send me a text message just to say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't work with you, I'm full at this moment. Give me some correspondence versus silence.
Right.
So I really try to keep that in mind as a professional, that if I were seeking help, that's what I would at least want from a therapist. So I always keep that fresh for myself. So that's why I say text me. It is literally the best way to reach me.
So for someone who's maybe therapy curious, are there any recommendations, maybe like some reading material or something like that, like if you're interested in maybe taking that type of step, that you would maybe recommend to folks?
Yeah, it depends again on kind of what somebody is struggling with and going through. There's a really great website. It's called psychologytoday.com, and it is where you can go on and filter out all of your interests and kind of what you're struggling with, what kind of gender of a therapist you're looking for, sexual orientation, race, religion, all of those things. So it's a really great resource just to get access of what kind of therapists are in your community, and also if they accept insurance or private pay, things like that. or you can just simply go on Google and type in kind of what specifically you're looking for as a resource.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate all the time that you've provided me here today, because this has been a tremendously interesting conversation for me personally, to kind of explore some of those concepts and thoughts. I didn't share with you, or maybe I did share with you, my daughter is studying psychology at Adler University up in Chicago. So that was another reason that I was like, yeah, this will be kind of an interesting conversation, because her and I will have some conversations as far as some of the things that she's studying now, and I always find it terribly interesting. But I truly appreciate you spending some time and hopefully exposing the audience here to what I think is something that should not have the same kind of resistance that it does, is the idea of mental health and preparing yourself not only in your relationships but individually, for each day, and being mentally strong in the way that you approach things. And in my opinion, perspective has a lot to do with that. Attention, just paying attention to what's going around you. And the world we live in, there's so many distractions, right? There's so many things coming at us. And I think that when you have an opportunity and you really want to make that extra effort to fix or work on, not necessarily fixing, because can always use help just getting better at doing the couples thing, right?
And I always say there's nothing broken. So you're not broken. There's nothing broken within your relationship. So we don't necessarily need to fix you.
Right. I'm glad you said that, because I misspeak about stuff like that all the time.
I know, but that's a big misconception. People always say, you need to fix my husband.
Right.
Or you need to fix my wife. She's broken. And I say, no, we're not broken. We're not. No matter how horrific things have happened to us in our life, you're never broken.
I like that.
We just need to make some changes and some repairs and to heal, really. But you're not broken.
Well, on that, I will end our time together. But again, thank you so much, Ellisa. This has been actually fabulous. I'm really interested to see what kind of feedback we get on this particular
really
episode. And, there was, again, at the beginning of the episode, you can find some information. I give you some information on Ellisa, but here in the credits, you'll see some additional contact information as well. So if this is something you're interested in exploring, or if you have a friend who might benefit from this type of approach, I definitely encourage you to look Ellisa up. She's the only family therapist, the only couples therapist here in the Leander area. So give her a buzz or text her, right?
Absolutely. And you can also follow me or subscribe to my YouTube channel.
I almost forgot. I'm so glad you brought that up. Okay, so before we leave, Ellisa has this really excellent YouTube channel that she's started, and I find it really interesting, and it was one of the extra reasons that I wanted to reach out to her, because I started to see that work online, and I was like, that's super interesting. So I encourage you to look her up on YouTube as well. Definitely.
Yes, and I would say, give me some grace. I am a therapist.
She's much better at it than she gives herself credit for.
I'm not in the video world, so
I think you're doing a really good job. It caught my attention. So I'm not a purveyor either. It was interesting. So I do like what you're doing there, and I encourage you to continue to do that, because I think people will find that helpful.
I appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Well, that's it for today. Thank you all for joining us here on Lean and Leander, and we'll catch you at the next episode.